Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at Chien-Pao, putting it in the spotlight for the 2023 World Championships in Yokohama, Japan. Certainly an archetype which divides opinion, and seemingly we haven't yet got an optimal 60 yet. There was a top 16 placement at the NAIC as well as one in top 32, so there are some valid strengths here and finally some lists to go off of when looking towards this archetype going into the World Championships. Let's first talk about the general strategy of the archetype, and that is that Irida is still going to be the backbone of this water-based deck, where it can grab a water Pokemon and an item card from your deck and put them directly into your hand. This sort of tutor is very powerful and exclusive to these water-type decks, and is the entire build around here, where Irida is a fantastic means of getting early basics developed. We do like to go wide with the archetype, where we will try and get sometimes multiple Friggy backs if we are being threatened and have gone second in the game. We want to try and get our Reddit Greninja to get cycling and drawing cards. We want that Chien-Pao to start using that Shivery Chill and thinning the deck of water energies. And if we have any other bench sitters, which I'll talk about later, we also want those developed. So Irida to grab those VIP pass and go wide on the board is going to be really important for us, but also on turn 2 of the game, it's our easiest means of getting our Bax Caliber into play, which is the stage 2, which the entire deck works around, allowing us to attach our water energy immediately from hand as many times as we want during the turn. That opens up the floodgates literally for Chien-Pao to be one-hit KOing pretty much anything it needs to, and gives us potential burst acceleration for other attackers on the board like Radiant Greninja as and when we need it. So the Bax Caliber turn 2 is basically the backbone of the archetype, but Irida never really falls off in the game either, because Superior Energy Retrieval is a great reload for us, and oftentimes you will see cross switchers in his deck lists, so Irida becomes almost half of a boss's orders in many occasions at the same time. So that really is the lifeblood of the archetype. The Chien-Pao helps the deck tick quite nicely, that Shivery Chill being able to directly pull 2 water energy from the deck to your hand, as I mentioned, is some great deck thinning for you, allows you to start putting this energy straight into play if you already have your Bax Caliber, and works towards your Hailblade, so has great internal synergy with itself, but also can be used for concealed cards and other things we need throughout the turn as well, just to see more and get our combos rolling. Radiant Greninja also is just an exceptional card in most decks, and this one gets to take great advantage of Greninja because, again, such easy access to our energy thanks to Chien-Pao and energy retrieval, and such easy access to that Moonlight Shuriken option with that super cold ability, which is just exceptional for us. So if we really want to lean into this Greninja, we can try teching in Cancelling Clone, trying to bring up Manaphy, cancelling its ability and then taking out multiple threats on board, or using Lost City and knocking out threats, again, sometimes multiple at the same time. If you are going to target the Manaphy, it then opens up Shurikens for the remainder of the game for the most part for you, which is always going to be something that you want to look for. Onto the skeleton list then, and it's a pretty barren 48 cards because, as I've mentioned, we have only had a scattering of placements for Chien-Pao. There's not been one breakout performance that's made everyone go, yes, this is the definitive list. That's what we all need to be flocking towards. There's still a lot of debates over which V-Star should be played in the deck, whether or not we should be playing some Iono protection in the form of Bibarel or other means. We don't even know what stadium is best yet in the deck, so there's a lot up for grabs. The one thing that we have to know is that Irida is the core, and that the 3-2 Bax Caliber with 2 Rare Candy is certainly the lowest end you can go on this Stage 2 Pokemon. The Greninja always makes it in, the Luminion and the Manaphy, these are all going to be staples for the deck, and you need to lean into a pretty high ball search count, and I believe the Hisuian's really important as well, because Greninja's just so core. And it seems like more and more often I'm looking at the successful online data, the 4 count of Superior Energy Retrieval is popping up more and more and more, because it's a card that you just need on the spot to give yourself those burst potential turns with that Hailblade. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting through these really high hit points V-Max and V-Star Pokemon in the metagame right now. So let's have a look at some key decisions, I think. I've not really put these as tech options because the deck doesn't actually tech itself out too much, to be honest with you. It seems to be just trying to get its own strategy going, and that's where most people are having their headaches. So it comes down to a few key decisions going on in the deck. Do you want to play cross switchers, or do you want to go down the boss's orders route? The upside of cross switcher is that it gives you some immediacy. Sometimes you're using those Iridas on those opening stages, and turn 2 you can be gusting much more reliably. But if you go down a boss's orders route, it's much less reliable for you to get a Candy Baxcalibur and boss on turn 2. It's a bit of a high roll. So the cross switchers take up a lot of space, but give you some high roll plays, whereas I think the boss's orders is more reasonable through the mid game, but it's harder to weave in on most turns because it's hard for you to try and find enough pieces that you need, as well as boss's orders on the right turn. Cancelling Cologne versus Lost City is a bit of a debate as well. You probably want to be playing at least one of these 2 cards in your deck so that you can either get around Mana Fee or Lost Zone it for good, so that you are making full advantage of your Radiant Greninja at some point in the game. The Cologne being an item card and the cross switches being an item card means that if you want to go down that direction, Pokestop opens itself up to being a fantastic stadium for you. It gives you extra early game push to that ball search that I mentioned, where the deck is so reliant on getting those setups that Pokestop can just be that panic option to try and get you over that line. Also, you don't mind too much seeing Water Energy hit your discard pile because it opens up superiors for you as well, possibly earlier on in the game for some burst potential. So I personally really like Pokestop as a consistency buff, and that's why I normally lean down the Cologne switcher route personally. But you do gain spaces by not having to play the Cologne and just playing Lost Cities, and certainly gain spaces by playing Boss over Cross Switcher. Skaters Park is another option. This is a really solid stadium choice if you are expecting a really high hit point metagame and you want your Chien-Paos to be the main focus of the deck rather than the crafty spread options of Greninja, because if you're just retreating between 2 Chien-Paos, you gain those energies back immediately to your hand, use a second Shivery Chill and pull more energy for 1-hit KOs, so that seems to be pretty reasonable. And then the Lost Vacuum, it's a tutorable via Irida means of bouncing Stadium, and can also get rid of some tool cards, which I think is also pretty valuable. Bibarel is that Iono protection. Typically you'll see a 1-1 or 2-2 line in the Chien-Pao, but not everyone is playing this. Some people are just trying to cut those spaces and be as aggressive as possible and get that turn 2 play off, whereas Barrel is going to be for those more conservative players that want to make sure they stay in the game even towards those latter stages. And honestly, because we have so much discard fodder from Superiors and from Ultra Balls, it just tops you up throughout the game as well, which I think is a pretty handy option. I'm someone that always likes to have a lot of draw in my decks just to give myself control over the game, so I'm definitely a big Barrel fan. And there's still a debate around which V-Star is best. Arceus V-Star seemed to win out at the NAIC, where that Starbirth option just gave you that flexibility to get strong turn 2 plays going, helping you grab some key pieces out of the deck to have some explosive Baxcalibur turns in the opening stages. But that Palkia is an overall better attacker in its own right in the deck, and that Star Portal can once again open up the door for aggressive cross switcher or boss's orders plays, because rather than going down a route with Irida getting you candy backs, you can go for a turn of Star Portal, going for that Palkia, then grabbing a Cologne or a cross switcher piece. If you have one of those other pieces in your hand, suddenly you can be knocking out things more aggressively, and that's a different dimension to Chien-Pao for a deck that otherwise likes to go face in the opening turns quite often, because it doesn't have that luxury of boss quite so much, because you are so reliant on that candy. At the same merit, the Palkia becomes that full black plan, even if you have made your Baxcalibur and used Super Cold rather than a turn 2 Star Portal, knowing that if the opponent goes for a boss's orders play on Baxcalibur and knocking it out, knowing that you at least have Star Portal as a backup option is a great thing to have in the back pocket, and almost nullifies the entire option of a boss play on Baxcalibur, because you can respond by just getting a turn attached Star Portal play, you're still representing a huge chunk of damage, and then you can be putting Frigibax down on that same turn, and it's like nothing ever happened. The opponent's gone for a 1-prize Pokemon, and you're going to start racing much more effectively at that stage. So in many ways, Palkia can be a pretty nice contingency plan. Let's have a look at the matchups then, and it looks horrendous for Chien-Pao. Once again, this is the Trainer Hill data. This was run from the 17th of June up to the 17th of July, the day of recording, and it looks pretty grim. Chien-Pao is quite popular online, and people are still experimenting. I think that's what we're seeing from the data here. Like I've just mentioned, people do not know the best way to play this deck, and we're seeing all sorts of variation in deck lists and all sorts of variation in results. Chien-Paos are still making it into top 8s, are still making it into, deep ends of the tournaments, but there's the massive masses, which seem to be doing overall quite badly with the deck in the majority of matchups. Your only favourables are Goodra and United Wings, and you cannot expect to be seeing many of those at the World Championships, I don't think. Your even matchups are Gardevoir, Giratina, and Rapid Strike Box. These are all pretty decent scalps and very good to be in the game against these, but not necessarily being massively favourable is still a bit of a worry. And then we have the unfavourables, both Arc variants, Charizard Lost Box, regular Lost Box, Lugia, and even Ting-Lu as an unfavourable. Maybe a bit of a surprise, but if you at least play cancelling clones, that will improve your chances. Overall, from this data, I think you almost write it off because you have to really just go with your own gut instincts and think that if you can iron out a better Chien-Pao list than the masses, you're going to have far better win rates than what's being displayed right now, because logically, just looking at the matchup spreads, you should find ways to beat a lot of your unfavourables right now. You know, you have big one-hit potential into Arctina and Arc Umbreon. You, in theory, should be able to win a prize race fairly comfortably against them. You should find ways to take multi-prize turns into the Lost Box decks. You should easily be able to race against Lugia. I feel like all of these could end up being 50-50s if you iron out a perfect 60 and just get more proficient with the archetype than the masses are right now. On to a few different deck lists then, and this is where the main debates start coming in. The first list I'm going to show is a Palkia insurance policy, is what I'm calling it, where we just have a 1/1 line of Palkia, and like I said, you don't necessarily slam the Star Portal on turn 2, but it's an option in case you're getting hit with early Ionos or Judges and just don't have the option for Irida or Ultra Ball for Luminion or something like that. You have that option to Palkia at the very least, which can get you into the game. And by the same merits, if you do get Candy backs and you just set up a Palkia, even just a V on the bench, if the opponent then starts gusting your Baxcalibur, you can just instantly grab V-Star, Star Portal for the turn, still have a very solid play available to you, and then you can start re-establishing Frigibacks for the following turn. That's the main idea behind this build. It's not playing any backup engine Pokemon, say, other than Radiant Greninja. It's just going very heavy on the item cards. I'm, like I keep saying, a very big fan of the Pokestop. That's why you're seeing cross switches and cancelling clone in the deck list. I think this is personally the better way to go because of those small percentages gained by having Pokestop in your deck list for grabbing early VIP pass, grabbing early Ultra Ball, even late game finding your next candy, finding your next superior. I feel like it's just too powerful to not be playing these effects. And then you are going to be playing that heavy Irida line, Iono to chip in here and there, and you are going to play one Boss's Orders alongside those cross switches to round out the list. The next one I'm going to be showing is what we're calling the tight squeeze, where we're having the Bibarel and the Palkia all in the list, and we are still playing the cross switches and Pokestops. The only things that are getting a little bit cheeky is just 2 Rare Candy and 2 Baxcalibur. Yes, we have the Super Rods, but it still can get a little bit iffy here and there. But this is for someone that wants to have that backup plan of Bibarel to keep topping themselves up. Honestly, this is the deck list that I've probably played with the most out of the ones that we're talking about today, and I still am a really big fan of Bibarel. I wouldn't be cutting it myself. I feel like it's too important. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, so many archetypes have that possibility to Iono you out of the game. Make sure you have that Bibarel fallback, and because of how Chien-Pao prize races so effectively, it's really difficult for the opponent to actually prioritize Bibarel at any point in the game. If they're going for a single prize knockout, it's more likely going to be on the Baxcalibur than the Bibarel for the most part, so it feels like you have that safety net. As soon as the Bibarel is developed, you're going to have a much better and smoother time, and it actually makes you play your own Ionos much more comfortably. I feel like Iono is a not very powerful supporter card unless you have your own Bibarel fallback, in which case the card becomes fantastic for you because you're able to top yourself back up and feel pretty good about yourself. So yeah, this is what we're calling the tight squeeze right now. Onto a slightly different approach here, where we are cutting away from the cross switches as well as the Pokestops in favor of the Lost Cities and a couple copies of Boss's Orders. Now, immediately we gain a bunch more space. We get to play a 2/2 Palkia line, and we basically have a different mentality around this deck, where oftentimes turn 2 your best player is actually going to be Subspace Swell, and usually this is just a really high damage output option. But if you're combining this with Boss's Orders and Lost City, suddenly you offer up a different means of pressurizing certainly single prize decks, because you're just knocking out things for good and denying that potential from the opponent for the entire remainder of the game. So I feel like this is definitely a reasonable one. The last list I'm going to show is a 1/1 Arc plus 1/1 Bibarel that still has those Lost Cities and Boss's Orders in the deck list. Seeing as though you can Starbirth, you have much more license to actually pull off some crazy plays on turn 2, where you can get Candy backs and a Boss's Orders, or a Candy backs plus Lost City play early on. You can try and get some early Greninja tempo plays available to you. Essentially, the star buff gives you that huge power spike. Now, there are many builds of the Chien-Pao backs with Arc and no Bibarel, but I'm just going to straight up say that I think Bibarel is just way too good to not play in the list. A few other things, I'm playing the Quad Ultra Ball in the 60 just to give yourself better outs to the V-Star on turn 2, because that is your bread and butter at the end of the day. If you get Star Buff, you get pretty much anything else you can ask for. So that's really the emphasis behind this deck list. It's playing 3 Stadium and Lost Vacuum as well, staying on that slightly higher side, because there's even more reason to want to bounce that path, because again, Star Buff unlocks so much potential for the deck list. On to the closing thoughts of Chien-Pao then. Honestly, if you're going by the numbers and going by the stats and trusting the testing of the general player base right now, Chien-Pao is looking grim. There's basically no reason to put your time and effort into Chien-Pao if you want to go by the numbers. However, I feel like if you are someone that really does want to play Chien-Pao at the World Championships, you have to test a ton of these variations, find out which is the best, iron out your list, and just trust your testing more than anything else. If you're able to do that, sure, you'll end up with probably a pretty decent 60, but even then, you've probably had to spend a few weeks ironing out this list, making it better and better. There could be a number of players who were close to playing Chien-Pao at NAIC, but just felt the list was undercooked, underbaked, and possibly that gives them a good emphasis, a good amount of time between the NAIC and the World Championships, where they could have ironed out that 60 and actually are now just getting a ton of reps in with the archetype. But that won't be for everyone. I know there'll be players who wouldn't have gone to the NAIC, and if you're so worried, even at this stage, heading into the Worlds, as we really do creep closer to that tournament, if you still don't know the ideal 60, what are you doing? Why are you still playing Chien-Pao? You need to jump off that train, because you're just not going to have enough games in with your eventual 60 at the World Championships. You want to be locked in, pretty comfortable, knowing your list inside and out, knowing the limitations and the strengths of your exact 60. And if you're still floating between a deck list and not knowing what's right, I have to tell you, it's not going to be a good time to be playing Chien-Pao. You're just not going to have the best day, in my opinion. The good news, however, for Chien-Pao players is that, as I've just stated, we don't really know what the best 60 is, so players may fall into pitfalls that your specific list ends up playing that they're not necessarily expecting in every Chien-Pao list. You basically discover what sort of Chien-Pao the opponent's playing as the first couple turns play out, and each of these iterations and variations have different strengths and weaknesses to them that your opponent may not know how to exploit if their testing has been against some of these other variants. So you might get small edges because your opponent doesn't play necessarily optimally against you, because your build has some secret spice that they don't really know about until it's too late in the game. I would also say that this is one of the faster decks. There's not a huge amount of actions for the list, and you have high damage output potential, you have spread potential, you have multiple ways of taking multi-prize turns, so you are probably not going to tie in a best of 350-minute scenario, which is pretty appealing. And we also have those turn 2 pop-offs where if you've just gone first as Chien-Pao, get your turn 2 Bats Caliber out. Sometimes if your opponent's not been able to develop Manaphy, you instantly win with Greninja. Sometimes if they've not been able to evolve up into their V-Stars, you instantly win by taking a big blow-up knockout with that Chien-Pao into a Lugia, into an Arceus, into a Mew, one of those sorts of things. So yeah, I think there are real reasons to like this deck in a best of 3 timed format, and that is a big bonus for the Chien-Pao deck. Let me know your thoughts down below. Is Chien-Pao just not a good enough archetype in the game, or is there going to be a brand spanking new list that's going to churn through day 1 of the World Championships? Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.